In the heart of a world built on legacies and bloodlines, where the powerful sit behind velvet ropes and the rules are written by those who never bleed, she returned. Madeline Ross. A name buried under dust, shame, and the shadow of a man who once ruled the arena with nothing but grit and a loaded rifle. They didn't see her as a threat. Just a woman chasing ghosts. A relic trying to step into a game carved for men. They chuckled when she stepped onto the field. Whispers followed her like vultures. Wasn't she the one whose father lost everything? Isn't she the girl who vanished after the scandal? But what they didn't know was that Madeline wasn't here to ask for a second chance. She was here to take back what was stolen, and she came armed with a calm hand, an unshakable will, and a secret that could burn it all down. Madeline Ross hadn't set foot on the tournament grounds in over a decade. As her boots pressed into the dry, cracked dirt of the shooting range, 1,000 memories came flooding back, some warm, most haunting. The scent of gun oil and sun-baked wood, once so familiar, now felt foreign, almost hostile. The towering scoreboard in the distance still bore the faded imprint of her father's name, now buried beneath years of dust and disgrace. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of what she was about to do. This wasn't just a competition, it was a battleground of ghosts. Her heartbeat thudded against her chest like distant gunfire. Every step forward was a silent defiance of the town's judgment, every breath a reminder that she was still standing. People stared. Some nudged each other. She could hear their whispers even through the silence. That's her, the cheater's daughter. Their words scraped against her skin like sandpaper, but she kept her head high. She had no intention of running this time. Madeline had spent years building a new life far away from the stench of scandal. But that life always felt like a mask, and masks get heavy. This return wasn't about proving anyone wrong, it was about proving something to herself. She wasn't here to beg for forgiveness. She was here to finish what her father never got the chance to. And if she had to walk through fire to get there, then so be it. Her father taught her how to shoot, but life taught her how to fight. As Madeline pushed open the canvas flap of the registration tent, a hush fell over the room like a curtain dropping on a stage. The air was thick, dense with heat, tension, and the rustling murmur of judgment. Conversations paused mid-breath. Eyes, curious and cautious, swung in her direction. It had been years since anyone in this town had seen a Ross walk through these doors, especially her. She stood still for a second, letting the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. Her boots pressed into the dusty ground, grounding her as her gaze swept the room and landed on him. Sheriff Wade. Seated behind a wooden desk cluttered with paperwork and tournament forms, he looked up with a slow, deliberate smile. The kind that didn't quite reach his eyes. The same eyes that once gleamed with glee as he dismantled her father's legacy, piece by piece. Age had softened the sharpness of his face, but not the arrogance. That part remained untouched by time. Well, Wade drawled, his voice dripping with sarcasm, if it isn't Madeline Ross. Didn't think you had it in you to come back here, let alone sign up. Madeline walked forward, each step steady, her heart pounding against her ribs like a war drum. She wouldn't let him see the storm behind her calm exterior, the fury, the grief, the fear. Not now. She pulled the crinkled registration form from her satchel and placed it firmly on the desk in front of him. I'm not here for anyone's approval, she said coolly. I'm here to shoot. Wade leaned back in his chair with a slow, deliberate creak, folding his arms across his broad chest. Your daddy, God rest him, left quite the mess when he stormed out of here. Folks haven't forgotten. Madeline's eyes didn't flinch. Neither have I. There was a flicker of something in Wade's gaze. Surprise? Amusement? Contempt? Maybe all three. He picked up the form, scanned it, and then stamped it hard enough for the desk to rattle. The echo felt like a gunshot. "Fine. You're in," he said. "But don't expect any favors. This competition's not for the faint of heart." Madeline took back the stamped form, slid it into her bag, and turned without another word. As she walked out, she felt the heat of every stare on her back. Some eyes burned with doubt, others with suspicion. But underneath it all, she sensed something more dangerous: expectation. And buried beneath the pounding in her chest, she felt it too, the hunger to prove them all wrong. The first round of the competition arrived like a storm on the horizon, looming in the quiet morning air. The coldness of dawn hadn't yet dissipated, but Madeline stood tall, her posture stiff as the weight of the moment pressed against her chest. The sound of her boots crunching on the gravel felt loud, almost invasive, as she made her way to the shooting line. It had been years since she'd competed, since she'd felt this kind of pressure. Yet, as she stood there now, rifle in hand, the sensation was all too familiar. Her fingers tightened around the barrel, instinctively adjusting to the cold metal. Her eyes, however, weren't focused on the rifle, they were fixed on the target ahead, her mind drowning out the noise of the crowd gathering behind her. There were murmurs, whispers, comments she could hardly bear to hear, about her father, about the shame that had followed him. Those words had followed her too. She could feel their weight pressing against her, taunting her, but she refused to let them define her. "I am not my father's mistakes," she thought, her breath steadying. "I am more than that." The other competitors were lined up next to her, each of them standing like silent statues. The men to her left barely glanced in her direction, their posture stiff and rigid, though their eyes, sharp, cold, were full of disdain. They still remembered her father's failure, they still saw her as nothing more than his daughter, and that was enough for them to dismiss her. She had no illusions about it. Madeline could feel the tension in the air. Her hands began to sweat despite the chill in the morning. She fought the tremor in her fingers, fighting to maintain control over her body. She had trained for this moment, prepared for it, yet now that she was here, the weight of expectation felt unbearable. Not only was she competing for the legacy of the Ross name, her father's name, but now she was fighting for herself, for her own place in this unforgiving world. She exhaled slowly, focusing all her energy on the target in the distance. Her breath came in slow, controlled cycles, inhale, exhale, her mind clearing with each movement. Her heart still pounded in her chest, but she willed it into the background, ignoring the voice in her head that whispered doubts. She could hear the harsh whisper of Sheriff Wade from earlier in the week, calling her a troublemaker and saying, "You've got no business here." The nerve of him. This isn't his world. It's mine. The horn blew, its sharpness cutting through her thoughts like a knife. Time seemed to freeze for a moment, her vision narrowing to the target. The rest of the world, the chatter, the doubts, the weight of history, disappeared. It was just her and the rifle, the air thick with the promise of the shot. Her finger moved, slow and deliberate, pressing gently against the trigger. The world seemed to slow even further as she squeezed, every inch of her focus locked in place. The rifle bucked against her shoulder with a sharp recoil as the shot rang out, and for a split second, she wasn't sure what to expect. Had she missed? Had she hit the mark? The sound of the shot was like a gunshot from a war, sharp, violent, resonating across the field. She didn't move, didn't flinch. She didn't even breathe. Her eyes stayed fixed on the target, watching as it swayed under the impact, her heart thudding in her chest. The announcement came over the loudspeaker, "Madeline Ross, 10.0. The crowd's reaction was immediate, murmurs rippling through the air, disbelief, surprise, some barely contained amusement. But Madeline didn't look away from the target. She didn't smile. She didn't allow herself to feel even the slightest satisfaction. Not yet. She was just getting started. Across the field, Sheriff Wade stepped forward, his eyes narrowing as he caught her gaze. A thin, Almost imperceptible smile played at the corners of his lips, but it was a smile that carried a challenge, a question. "Will you break under the pressure?" But Madeline didn't flinch. She stared back at him, feeling a fire kindle deep in her chest. No, she wouldn't break. Not this time. This was her legacy, her moment to prove she was more than just the whispers in the dark. She had come here not only to reclaim her father's name but to carve out her own. And she would stop at nothing to see that through. The second round arrived with a heavy stillness that seemed to envelop Madeline, her thoughts swirling in a vortex of doubt and determination. Her chest tightened as she stood at the shooting line, the weight of the rifle in her hands both familiar and foreign. The first round had gone well, but that success felt distant now. It was only a fleeting moment in a competition that demanded nothing less than perfection. And Madeline, despite everything, knew that she couldn't afford to let this opportunity slip away. She glanced at her fellow competitors, each of them positioned with unnerving precision, their eyes fixed ahead with cold determination. But it was Greg Turner, the man she'd grown up watching in the shadows of her father's legacy, who commanded her attention. He stood across from her, a towering figure whose presence seemed to pulse with quiet menace. He had been a rival of her father's, a man who had always treated Madeline like an afterthought, dismissing her as nothing more than the daughter of a former champion. To him, she wasn't here to make history, she was here to live in the shadow of a past she could never outrun. Madeline's hands tightened around the rifle, the cold metal cutting into her palms. "I'm not my father," she told herself, though the thought did little to calm the storm inside her. "I'm not a memory. I'm not some legacy that's been left behind for me to pick up." But the words felt hollow, as if trying to convince herself of something she wasn't entirely sure of. A whisper in the back of her mind kept reminding her, "You're carrying his name. You're carrying his failure." The pressure was suffocating. She could feel the weight of the audience's gaze on her, the quiet whispers that filled the space between the shots. Everyone was watching, waiting. Waiting for me to fail. Greg's eyes were on her now, the subtle smirk that tugged at the corner of his mouth sending a jolt of anger through Madeline. He didn't even have to say anything. His presence alone spoke volumes. He didn't believe in her. He thought she was a joke, a mere footnote in a history that didn't belong to her. And that thought, that belief, cut deeper than anything he could say aloud. But Madeline wasn't here to prove him right. She wasn't here to prove anyone right. She was here to prove something to herself, to reclaim the pieces of her identity that had been stolen, buried under the weight of expectation. The horn sounded, breaking her thoughts and forcing her back into the present. It was time. The rifle felt heavier now, as if the stakes had just risen. She took her stance, planting her feet firmly on the ground. She could hear the soft rustle of fabric as the other competitors readied themselves, but all of that faded into a blur. All that mattered now was the target, the clean black circle in her line of sight. Her heart was beating louder, faster. She could feel it pounding in her ears, the pulse of blood rushing through her veins. But there was no time to listen to it. "Focus," she thought, pushing everything else aside. "You've done this 1,000 times. This is just another shot. You can do this." Madeline's breath caught in her chest as she raised the rifle, the cool weight of it pressing against her shoulder. She didn't look at Greg. She didn't look at the crowd. Her focus was narrow, sharp. She found her aim, her breath steadying in sync with her movements. Inhale, steady your hands. Exhale, control the tremor in your fingers. Her finger found the trigger. The weight of it seemed almost unbearable now, as if every muscle in her body were resisting. But she couldn't let the fear take hold. She had to silence the voice inside her that kept asking, "What if you fail?" She had to block out the echo of her father's defeat, the whispered rumors that had followed her like shadows. You were not him. You were not your father's failure. The world around her seemed to slow, the space between her breath and the moment she'd pull the trigger expanding in her mind. For one brief instant, everything went still. And then, with a deep breath and a firm squeeze of her finger, the shot rang out. The rifle kicked back in her hands, and Madeline barely had time to register the sound of the shot before she was already scanning the target. The world felt suspended in that heartbeat. Please, she thought. Please let it be enough. Her eyes locked onto the target. Her heart skipped as she saw it, a perfect hit, dead center. The score came up on the board, 10.0. A surge of disbelief and triumph hit her all at once. The crowd's reaction was immediate, the roar of approval almost deafening. She didn't hear it, not at first. She didn't care. All she could focus on was the target, and the truth that was now undeniable. Greg Turner's face had shifted, the cocky smirk fading into something closer to frustration, maybe even surprise. For the first time, he looked at her, not with disdain, but with respect. She'd earned it. And that knowledge sent a rush of adrenaline through her veins. But it wasn't just the external validation she was after. Madeline knew that this was more than just winning a round. This was about reclaiming her identity, carving a space for herself in a world that had always seen her as a shadow of the past. This is my moment. This is who I am. Her chest still ached from the weight of her father's legacy, but it didn't feel like a burden anymore. It felt like a foundation, a place from which she could stand and declare, I am not my father's ghost. I am Madeline Ross. And I am here to win. Madeline stood at the edge of the firing line, her body taut with anticipation, the familiar hum of the crowd barely penetrating the fog of concentration that clouded her mind. The arena had grown eerily quiet, save for the sound of her breath, slow, deliberate, but heavy with the weight of what was about to happen. She felt a cold bead of sweat trickle down her spine as she adjusted her stance, the rifle resting gently in her arms. This was the moment she had trained for, the culmination of years of sacrifice, the months of grueling practice, of pushing past every doubt, every fear. Her eyes flickered briefly to the side, catching sight of Greg Turner, the man who had become both her greatest rival and, in a twisted way, her reason to keep going. Greg's presence had always been a reminder of how far she still had to go, the father-sized shadow she was always trying to escape. His rigid posture, his cool, almost detached demeanor, it was a facade she had come to know too well. He was the golden boy of the shooting world, a champion who had everything, who'd mastered the art of staying calm under pressure. Madeline, on the other hand, was constantly fighting to prove herself. She wasn't just trying to win this tournament. She was fighting for something deeper, for her own sense of identity, for validation that she could stand alone, outside of her father's enormous legacy. Her father. The image of him popped into her mind, strong, resolute, the kind of man who commanded respect with nothing more than a look. It had been his dream, his world, that had pulled her into the shooting sport in the first place. But when he fell from grace, his downfall had been a public one. And in his wake, there had always been this feeling, this weight that pressed down on her. The pressure to live up to something she couldn't quite grasp. It wasn't just about winning, it was about honoring him, about proving that his legacy wasn't a curse, but a gift. But now, standing here, she knew the truth. She was fighting for more than that. She was fighting for herself. The announcer's voice crackled over the loudspeakers, pulling her from her thoughts. Final round. Shooters ready. Madeline's fingers tightened around the stock of her rifle. The cold metal was familiar, grounding. She knew the drill. It was always the same, find your rhythm, silence the chaos, let your body do what it had been trained to do. But as she took a deep breath, something shifted inside her. This wasn't like the other rounds. This wasn't just a test of skill. This was a test of her resolve. The world around her faded into a blur. There was only the target now, a white circle in the distance, just waiting to be pierced by the sharpness of her aim. Her breathing slowed, her heart rate steadying. She could feel the steady pulse of the gun's weight against her shoulder, the slight tremble in her hands, but it didn't matter. She had learned long ago that doubt was the enemy in this game, and she had buried it deep. Every second, every movement, was calculated. There was no room for error. Her eyes drifted again to Greg. He was already set, his body a perfect silhouette against the backdrop of the arena, the confidence radiating from him like an impenetrable shield. But this time, Madeline saw something different, a tiny crack in the armor. His fingers twitched ever so slightly, his jaw clenched just enough to reveal the tension beneath. The image was subtle, but it spoke volumes. Greg wasn't as invincible as he wanted everyone to believe. He was just as human as she was. He had something to lose too. In that moment, something inside Madeline clicked. The doubts that had plagued her for years, the constant comparison to her father, the suffocating need to prove herself, it all seemed so distant now. She wasn't here to fight Greg's battle. She was here to fight her own. The realization was empowering, like a weight lifting from her shoulders. Her hand was steady on the rifle now, the barrel pointing unwaveringly at the target. She knew her shot would define this moment, but it wasn't the pressure that controlled her, it was the calm. She had spent years on this journey, enduring the frustration of failure, the sting of rejection, the silent judgment of those who thought she was merely living in her father's shadow. But that was over. She was done being defined by anyone but herself. She inhaled deeply, her fingers curling around the trigger, the rifle's weight a solid anchor to her body. The tension in the air felt almost unbearable now, her heartbeat thumping in her ears like a drumbeat. Her mind was sharp, clearer than it had ever been. All the noise, all the distractions, faded into nothingness. It was just her and the target. And then, as if everything in the world had fallen away except for this one moment, she squeezed the trigger. The shot rang out, its echo reverberating through the arena like a wave. Madeline didn't wait to hear the impact. She was already scanning the target, her pulse racing. It was done. She had done it. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. The audience erupted into a roar, but Madeline's attention was solely on the scoreboard. Her eyes locked onto the numbers as they flashed. 10.0. She let out a breath she didn't even realize she'd been holding. The weight in her chest lifted, and a calm, unexpected peace flooded her. It was done. She had done it. She had stood up, faced the impossible, and conquered it, not because of her father, but because of her. The realization hit her like a wave, overwhelming and freeing all at once. She wasn't just a product of her past. She was something more. She was her own legacy. Greg's shot was still on the board, but it didn't matter anymore. He had come close, but not close enough. Madeline had won. Not because she was better, not because she had outshot him, but because she had outgrown the need to prove anything to anyone. She was enough. Her gaze shifted to Greg, and for the first time, she saw him, really saw him. He wasn't the threat he once seemed. He was just another competitor, someone else in the arena, chasing the same elusive victory she had sought for so long. But he wasn't the reason she had won. She was. As the announcer's voice boomed over the loudspeakers, declaring her the victor, Madeline took a slow step forward. The weight of the trophy in her hands was heavy, but it felt earned. She raised it above her head, a quiet smile tugging at the corners of her lips. She didn't need the applause to know what she had achieved. She had finally claimed her place in this world, not as the daughter of a legend, but as a legend in her own right. When the last shot rang through the silence, there was no applause, just stunned silence and the weight of truth settling in. The girl they dismissed, the woman they underestimated, had just rewritten the rules. Madeline Ross didn't win for glory. She didn't come for their praise. She came for justice, raw, unfiltered, and long overdue. And though the crowd eventually rose to their feet, it wasn't for a champion. It was for a reckoning. They will remember her, not because she survived, but because she made them confront every lie they built their world on. She came from the ashes of disgrace, and walked out a storm. And now, whenever they hear the crack of a rifle, they won't just think of victory. They'll think of her.